Morning all. Nearly 90% of head teachers believe the government is not going far enough to help schools in England recover from the pandemic. That's according to research from the National Association of Head Teachers, shared exclusively with Sky News. Well, last month, ministers unveiled a £1.4 billion package to help children catch up with lost learning. The government describes the recovery plan as ambitious and says total funding exceeds £3 billion when added to earlier pledges. But as our People in Politics correspondent, Nick Martin, found at one primary school in Cheshire, many teachers are struggling to meet their pupils' needs.
This was the desk. I had quite a small desk and I was just sat in my laptop wishing I could go out and play.
Liam has spent months learning at home.
But now we know staying off school for a long, long time and doing homeschooling isn't actually as good.
There are 540 pupils at Woodlands. This is a large primary school in Ellesmere Port in Cheshire. By the time the pandemic is over, most of the children here, and millions more across the UK, will have missed months and months of time in school. You know, children have spent so long out of the classroom that no amount of homeschooling can match this.
So we're going to start maths now.
During lockdown, only vulnerable children or those of key workers were allowed to come in. The rest had to be homeschooled.
My mum was actually really good. My brother, Liam, he helped me with my phonics. We got a pack of little phonics cards so I could practice at home.
Jessica's 7. She's missed a lot of school, especially crucial phonics lessons. That's the method schools use to teach reading and writing.
You worry that, you know, academically they're not going to be able to keep up maybe with some of the other children. You worry that you've not done enough homeschooling. You worry that you've not kept their spirits up enough. You worry about everything.
What was our target number that we started with yesterday, Narula?
Initial findings from research done by the National Association of Head Teachers, shared exclusively with Sky News, reveals that 87% of school leaders said the government's COVID recovery funding was not sufficient to meet the needs of their pupils. They also found that an average school is down by nearly £60,000 since the pandemic began. That's the extra cost of COVID security, supply staff and lost income from not being open to the community.
Schools were already under financial pressure beforehand, so now if you wanted to put in additional support for children, you'd be hard pushed to, because most of us have spent extra cash on cleaning or, you know, PPE stuff, etc., because whilst the government have committed money to us, it hasn't fulfilled that shortfall.
The government is putting £3 billion into schools, which includes extra catch-up lessons. But teaching unions say this isn't enough. Nick Martin, Sky News.
A bit of breaking news for you. In the last couple of minutes, the Office for National Statistics has published the GDP figures for May. Our man in the know, our business correspondent, Paul Kelso, has the details. Paul, what are we learning?
UK GDP in May, these are the figures for May this year, grew by 0.8%, Neil. Now, that's lower than many economic forecasters were expecting. They were almost double that was the expectation, 1.5%, just 0.8%. That's still 3.1% below pre-pandemic levels of the economy back in February 2020, but it is the fourth consecutive month of growth in the economy. Of course, there's a good reason for the fact the economy is growing is the unlocking of the economy began certainly continued apace in May. The service sector has driven this increase. Services up nearly 1%, 0.9% in May. The figure that jumps out is that accommodation and restaurant trade jumped 37.1% in May. Again, that May 17th date was a step on the roadmap when accommodation could begin letting rooms overnight to people and restaurants could open up again. There are some continuing little warning signs about the state of the economy in here. Manufacturing fell in May, 16.5%, and one of the reasons for that is this microchip shortage that we've talked about occasionally, a shortage of the processors that go into almost everything we buy nowadays. They've held up the car production around the world and production and delivery of electronic goods. So far from out of the woods, but a fourth month of economic growth for the economy, and we'd expect these figures.
Oh, we appear to have lost Paul, but thankfully we got most of what we needed to know from him. Joining us this morning with, we hope, fewer audio problems, the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps. Mr Shapps, good to see you this morning.
Morning.
Somewhat appropriate that we come off the back of the GDP figures and a week of big announcements, yours yesterday, certainly one that people are hoping will give a shot in the arm to the economy. Just take us through the thinking behind that which you announced yesterday, particularly as regards the lack of requirement for people coming back double vaccinated from amber list countries to isolate.
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, up until now, if you've gone to an amber list country, well, for a start, we said you shouldn't be going there for holidays, but you also had to come back and you had to quarantine or self-isolate. What we did yesterday, on the basis of the fact that we now have such a large proportion of people fully vaccinated, it said if you have been fully vaccinated, then you can essentially travel from the 19th of July to an amber list country without needing to come back and quarantine. You'll still need to come back and take a day 2 PCR test, but that will, of course, open up a large number of countries which fall into that amber category, by far the biggest group between the red, amber and green. So good news for people who are looking forward to maybe seeing loved ones abroad or even catching some sun.
But what, though, of loved ones who live abroad and come back here? As you say, you're talking about people who are fully vaccinated, but fully vaccinated via the NHS. I think at the moment there are around about 30 countries that accept our certification. Why won't we accept anyone else's?
Well, that would be phase 2 of it, and something we're very actively working on at the moment. Of course, with the UK vaccination programme, you're able to demonstrate your vaccine status very easily. The full NHS app, that's not the COVID app, I should point out, it's the regular NHS app, contains your record for your vaccines. So once you've been fully vaccinated, it effectively gives you a certificate which you can show on screen or download. So it's easy for us to be able to use that in order to demonstrate the status for somebody returning home. That's the first stage. The next thing is to be able to recognise apps from other countries or certification from other countries, easier done from some places like the EU, where they have a digital app coming along, than it is in the United States, where they have, I think, 50 different systems, one for each state, largely paper-based. So there's some complexities to work through there. But this is phase 1, and we hope to follow it up quickly with double vaccinated people from other countries coming here.
Can you put some sort of time frame on that? Because clearly a lot of people are looking forward to your announcement yesterday. They may well have some time off coming in the summer. There are an awful lot of expat Brits wanting to come back to the United Kingdom to see their family. Do you think you're going to be able to have this done, next couple of weeks, next couple of months, by the end of the summer?
Yeah, so, I mean, first of all, this announcement kicks in from the 19th of July for anyone who's been vaccinated in the UK. And then secondly, we're actively working on this issue of how to accept vaccinations from other people. Obviously, we'll look at whether they are World Health Organization certified and the like. I would think in terms of timescale, in the next couple of weeks, I'll be able to come forward and say more about other locations in the world.
Do you understand, though, the frustration of expatriate Brits? For example, living in Italy, this weekend, we're going to see around about 1,000 Italian fans coming to this country to watch the football and then heading straight back home afterwards. There will be thousands of people looking at that and saying, well, why can't we do the same? People who perhaps haven't seen their families for the best part of a year and a half.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, we want to be able to open that up for people and actively working on it. I should say with the football, they come to a specific location, they're taken direct to the football, they leave again 12 hours later. They're unable to travel anywhere else, etc. It's a very restricted programme. But nonetheless, I'm going to take the point. I think we do want to get this done. Part of the issue, of course, is elsewhere, the level of fully vaccinated people tends not to be at the levels that we've got in the UK because we got on with our vaccination programme so much faster. So there aren't as many fully vaccinated people, for example, from Europe to come here. But nonetheless, we are working on it. We do want to get this part of it resolved as well. I thought it was important with this phase 1 section, people who've been vaccinated in the UK, to get that information out there as soon as we were ready to make the announcement, which is why I did that yesterday. But I said we'll follow up with phase 2 for people coming the other way as soon as we can.
Just explain as well, if you can, Minister, the rationale for asking for a PCR test from children as young as 5-6 years of age.
Yeah, so first of all, I should point out that children, 18-year-olds and under 18, of course, children, will be able to follow the same rules regardless of whether they've been double vaccinated. And of course, the answer is they won't have been double vaccinated, because currently the Joint Committee on Vaccines and Immunisation have not recommended yet vaccinating children. We're waiting for them to opine on it. So we thought it was right and proper, because they can't be vaccinated, to allow them to adhere to the same rules. But we must, of course, make sure that we've got protection for everybody in the United Kingdom in place, and a PCR test remains the best way to do that. And it does mean that we're able to then keep a very close eye on those variants of concern, which are, of course, the thing that we are most worried about now. We don't want to put the country at risk, and that could be carried by a child as well. So that's the reason why we're doing it, and it's the reason why everybody will still have to take a PCR test on day 2 when they return.
Indeed. You mentioned a couple of minutes ago the NHS COVID-19 app, and I'm presuming actually will have had conversations about this with people in your own department about the concerns that when we get into the summer and we see, as the Health Secretary outlined, cases perhaps running as high as 100,000 new cases a day, perhaps even higher than that, that we are going to be in a position where we are seeing potentially millions of people, and certainly not the majority of them with COVID-19, but millions of people being forced to self-isolate. What action is being taken on the app at the moment?
Yeah, that's right. I take advice on this, or we take advice on this from the medical experts. And, as things like the overall nationwide levels for things like the amount of distance that you need to keep, the social distancing and other rules are looked at, so will we look at the way that the app performs with regard to what are now the new standards being in place. So we always keep a very close eye on those sort of things. I did speak to the Health Secretary about it yesterday. He's very aware of this, and we'll keep it under constant review, because we want the app to be a useful tool in our armoury to make sure that we're all able to be aware of and ultimately defeat the coronavirus, and we want it to continue to work in that way.
Yeah, so sorry to interrupt, Minister. We're just a bit pushed for time, but people are deleting the app as we speak. People are switching off the contact tracing aspect of it. It is fine that there will be some tinkering. We're told that it will be less sensitive in future. But if people have deleted it from their phone, they're unlikely to be putting it back on. It just feels like we might have missed the boat on this one.
That's not actually the evidence, by the way. We're still seeing lots of people downloading the app. We encourage people to do so. As I say, we'll keep the sensitivity of it under review to align with the new recommendations that come in, guidelines that come in on the 19th of July. So we'll continue to do that. It is a very useful tool in the armoury, and no one wants to get long COVID. No one wants to get COVID and pass it on to somebody who becomes seriously ill or worse, dies. So it's in all our interest to carry on using every tool that we've got to defeat coronavirus. And the app will remain an important part of our armoury to do that. And we encourage people to carry on using it in the same way as we encourage people to keep applying common sense, all the things we know about, better outside than indoors and all the rest of it. And the app's another part of that armoury.
I do want to finish off our discussion this morning, if I can, Transport Secretary, on your brief and about public transport. Over the past couple of days, you will have seen a number of groups that are interested, perhaps representing those who are immunosuppressed, representing people who were in the vulnerable category before. The removal of the mandating of masks on public transport is petrifying vulnerable people up and down the country. What would your advice be to those that have to travel by public transport who fall into that category? Would you simply say that they should travel off-peak?
Yeah, for a start, we'll still be issuing guidelines. And as with everything to do with coronavirus, similar to the conversation we're just having, we've been living with this for a year and a half now. People know the things to do in order to try to keep themselves safe. And it's still sensible to wear a face covering if you're on a crowded piece of transport, a crowded tube, for example. But clearly, if you're on a train, on perhaps a long distance service, there's no one else in the carriage, it's not really protecting anyone. And we're able to now shift to people using their own common sense increasingly as we get through the 19th of July and asking people to do that. So I think it's right that we switch these things from the law to guidance, but nonetheless that doesn't mean that we're not guiding people to be sensible and to think about how they can protect themselves and others, but recognising the fact that the majority of adults have now been double vaccinated, and of course reminding people to come forward for their vaccinations and their final vaccination if they've had the first one.
I can't have a government minister on the programme without at least once referencing the football coming up on Sunday. I won't ask you for a prediction for the result, but strange reports circulating this morning about people pushing perhaps for a bank holiday on Monday if England do it, perhaps allowing people to come in slightly later for work. What do you think?
Well, I wouldn't want to jinx it, I think, is what I'd say. We're all, not in my lifetime, I don't think in yours, have we been in this position. I don't want to say anything that's going to make any presumptions at all. And good luck to England on Sunday. We'll be right behind you.
Yeah, nicely sidestepped. Grant Shapps, good to see you this morning. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Still to come on the programme. A coalition of military charities have called on the government to strengthen legislation aimed at protecting members of the armed forces. At past, I'll be speaking to Matthew Seward of the Royal British Legion, as well as a former Royal Marine. Ofcom received a record number of complaints about programmes in the last year. Its chief executive will be telling us why at 7:45. And at 9:30, we'll be speaking to the writer Candice Braithwaite on her new book of essays offering the advice she wishes she'd been given growing up as a young black woman. 17 suspects, including 15 Colombian nationals, have been detained in Haiti in connection with the assassination of the country's president, Jovenel Moise, who was shot at his home on Wednesday. Our correspondent Laura Bundock is in the newsroom with more for us. Laura, tell us what you know.
The nation, Haitian police have been looking for those responsible. There's been a massive manhunt and a gun battle on the streets of the capital, Port-au-Prince. The police now say they have uncovered a highly armed international hit squad, which they believe was behind the killings, and they've paraded the 17 people they've arrested so far. Of these people, 15 of them are said to be from Colombia, and it's reported that they are former members of the Colombian army. Those paraded also included 2 Haitian Americans as well. We understand that 3 people from this unit have been killed and that there are further 8 still on the run. We don't really know the motive yet behind the assassination or what the link to Colombia is at the moment, but the Haitian police are saying this was a heavily armed and a highly trained group of people behind it. They've also put on display some of the weapons, this huge arsenal of weapons that was discovered. This arsenal included machetes, assault rifles. They seized mobile phones and passports as well. The 15-day state emergency that was declared in Haiti following the assassination is still underway, and we don't really know who will succeed the president at the moment. He wasn't universally popular. There'd been protests quite recently calling for his resignation. Haiti is one of the poorest countries in the region. I think the real worry now is that this incident will mark the start of another violent chapter of instability in the country.
Laura, thank you. The police watchdog has told Sky News 2 members of the Metropolitan Police have been served with misconduct notices over potential failings in the disappearance of teenager Richard Okorogie. The 19-year-old, who'd been shielding during the pandemic, went missing after leaving his home in West London in March. His body was found in a lake in Epping Forest in Essex on the 5th of April. Our correspondent Ivor Bennett has the story.
It's more than 3 months since Richard Okorogie's body was found. The circumstances around his disappearance and death still aren't known. But as police continue their investigation, they too are under the spotlight. And the probe into how the Met first handled the case has now seen 2 members of staff served with misconduct notices for potentially failing to pass on new and relevant information. The internal investigation was launched after complaints made by the 19-year-old's mother, who accused the Met of not treating her seriously when she reported her son missing.
I was a joke. They treated me like I was one lunatic.
Do you think race played a part?
Race did. I feel so. I feel so discriminated.
Her son disappeared after leaving home in West London on March the 22nd. The student, who had sickle cell disease, was last seen on CCTV that night in Loughton in Essex. Following an extensive police search, his body was found 2 weeks later in a pond in Epping Forest nearby. Richard's mother contacted the police the day after he vanished, but he wasn't officially recorded as missing until 24 hours later. Reacting to the misconduct notices, she said, "It is encouraging to hear that they are doing something, because I kept calling and at one point a police officer told me to stop. This news provides some vindication of what I said all along about how slow the police were to act." Misconduct notices don't necessarily mean disciplinary action will follow, but this is a welcome step for a family that's still searching for answers. Ivor Bennett, Sky News.
Time for some of the day's other news now. The risk of severe illness and death from COVID is extremely low for children and teenagers, according to the most comprehensive analysis of public data. Researchers suggest it means the vaccine needs to be shown to be extremely safe to be rolled out to under 18s. Well, let's take a look, as we always do, at the latest coronavirus data for the UK. There have been 32,551 new COVID cases in the most recent 24-hour period. 35 more deaths have been reported. That means the total number of people who've died within 28 days of a positive test now stands at 128,336. Well, here are the latest vaccination figures. They show another 86,953 people received their first jab. 171,477 received their second. In total, 34.2 million people have now received both doses of a COVID vaccine. Well, let's take a look at the link between cases and hospital admissions. Well, in the latest week, 2.7 people per 100,000 COVID cases were admitted to hospital. That compares to 7.7 at the same point at the start of the second wave towards the end of October. And while the number of people dying with COVID-19 has increased, the number of COVID deaths as a proportion of infections still 10 times lower than it was in October. The Olympic flame was greeted with a low-key ceremony when it arrived in Tokyo earlier today. It follows the announcement that spectators will not be allowed to attend the Games due to a recent surge in coronavirus cases. The absence of crowds clearly matters to some Olympic hopefuls, including the Australian tennis star Nick Kyrgios, who's pulled out of the Games, saying that playing without spectators doesn't feel right. Time for a quick run through some of the front pages, starting today with The Guardian. It leads with the relaxing of quarantine rules and how 100 countries will soon be open for holidaymakers in England to visit once again. According to The Telegraph, the Chancellor Rishi Sunak is encouraging people to return to the office when work from home rules change on July the 19th. Here's the Mail. It understands that a redesign of the NHS COVID app could spare thousands from isolation. Story we were just discussing with the Transport Secretary. Elsewhere, papers are leading with the football, the Mirror splashing with Fever Pitch, original, as fans call for a bank holiday Monday if England win. The Sun welcomes that possibility with, guess what, a pun, 3 lions. And with its tongue firmly in cheek over England's Italian opponents, the Star asks this: what have the Romans ever done for us? Time to see how the weather is looking this Friday as we edge into the week. All the details. Morning, Joe. Morning, Joe.
Good morning. Well, I'd love to say that the weather's fantastic, but it's not really. It's annoying. A lot of showers around, so you never really know who's going to get the showers. And some of these could be heavy, could be thundery. So let's take a look at what the forecast says.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Hello there, good morning to you. Well, it's not really what we expected this time in July, but tail end of next week we could be seeing some more settled summery conditions. But for the time being, showers, longer spells of rain. This morning we're mostly cloudy through many northern and western parts with some showery outbreaks here and there. It's also very warm and muggy this morning, quite uncomfortable during the night. Central, southern, eastern areas seeing brighter skies, and this is where we'll see the highest temperatures of around 24 or 25 degrees Celsius, that's 77 degrees Fahrenheit. But it's also in these brighter spots that we'll see the showers being triggered. So those showers becoming more widespread through the course of the afternoon, whereas northern and western parts really just stay rather dull. Later on, we see those showers starting to die away, only as cloud increases towards the southwest, and we see some fairly heavy rain coming in, and this is going to track its way eastwards overnight, reaching parts of West Sussex by morning and then pushing on towards the southeast. Further north, sunshine and showers once again.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Welcome back. In the last half an hour, I've been chatting with the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, and he confirmed that the government is currently working on allowing the UK to accept vaccine certifications from other countries in the near future. It comes after bookings for holidays to amber list destinations increased by as much as 400% after the government announced travel from the UK will become quarantine-free from the 19th of July for those with double vaccinations. Here's what Mr. Shapps told me.
The next thing is to be able to recognise apps from other countries or certification from other countries, easier done from some places like the EU, where they have a digital app coming along, than it is in the United States, where they have, I think, 50 different systems, one for each state, largely paper-based. So there's some complexities to work through there. But this is phase one, and we hope to follow it up quickly with double vaccinated people from other countries coming here. This announcement kicks in from the 19th of July for anyone who's been vaccinated in the UK. And then secondly, we're actively working on this issue of how to accept vaccinations from other people. Obviously, we'll look at whether they are World Health Organization certified and the like. I would think in terms of timescale, in the next couple of weeks, I'll be able to come forward and say more about other locations in the world.
Our political correspondent, Rob Powell, was lurking in the wings, listening to the Transport Secretary. So there we have it, from the horse's mouth. 2 weeks, and we should expect to start seeing some movement on this.
Yeah, and this will be a big deal for Brits that are living abroad, expats that maybe want to come back and see family, also people that want to come back and see friends and family that have had a vaccine and are not necessarily Brits but live abroad anyway. And they may well be wondering why they still have to quarantine, even though they've had the same stuff going into their arms, just in a different country and under a different health service. But more details, hopefully, in the next couple of weeks. It does sound like this is more of a paperwork or administrative issue than necessarily an issue around principles of travel. Also, Grant Shapps confirming as well what had been speculated in the last day or so, that the NHS app, the COVID app that is, that will ping you if you've come close to someone that's tested positive for COVID, that will be tailored so that it fits the new rules after July the 19th. Now, it's not quite clear what that'll mean, whether that means that the distance you have to come into contact will be relaxed slightly, or if the number of minutes you have to be there will be relaxed slightly as well. But as you pointed out to the Transport Secretary, the horse may have already bolted on this one, that people may be worried about getting pinged, up 62% week on week towards the end of June. And if people have already started deleting that app, then they may find its use starts to deteriorate.
They certainly may. Thanks very much, Rob. More from you throughout the morning, of course. But for us, a coalition of military charities is calling on the government to strengthen legislation aimed at protecting members of the armed forces. In an open letter signed by organisations including the Royal British Legion and Help for Heroes, MPs have been urged to widen the scope of the Armed Forces Bill currently going through Parliament. Pleased to say that we're joined now by the Assistant Director of Public Affairs at the Royal British Legion, Matthew Seward. Matthew, good to see you this morning. If you could, just take us through the aspects of the Armed Forces Bill that you suspect are somewhat lacking at the moment.
Yes, the Armed Forces Covenant is a promise from the government and the nation to those who serve, have served, and their families that they should not face disadvantage as a result of that service, and that special consideration may be appropriate in some circumstances, especially for the injured and the bereaved. Now, up to now, that's been a largely moral obligation. And what the government's doing in the Armed Forces Bill before Parliament now is strengthening some of that into a legal requirement on councils and some other public bodies in some areas of health, housing and education. Now, we and, as you say, 11 other major armed forces charities have come together today to say that we think that needs to go further, that it should be including national government and all the issues which may be affecting the armed forces community if it's to truly reflect the way both the way they access services and their needs.
You would concede, though, I'm sure, Matthew, that the way in which we treat our servicemen and women has improved a considerable amount over the past 3 decades.
Absolutely. We as an organisation, the British Legion, we campaigned for the Covenant to be originally included in legislation a decade ago now. And it's definitely the case that there have been many advances and improvements which have been made as a result of that. And there has been a big change in the way that we support our armed forces community over the last decade. And we want to make sure that that progress is maintained into the future, and that as the nation changes and the nature of the armed forces community changes, that it's sustained for the long term.
What then, when the Legion speaks to veterans, as you obviously do on a day-to-day basis, when you speak to veterans, where are the biggest pressures on them, on their lives, once they make that return to civilian life?
I think one of the things, I think the first thing to remember is that many, many people who have served in the armed forces gain many positives from their service, whether that's the comradeship of those they served alongside, or whether it's the skills that they've acquired, which enable them to make a great contribution to society. And we've seen yesterday the announcement about Afghanistan. Over the last 2 decades, 150,000 UK personnel served in Afghanistan. And so we can't generalize too much about their experiences. But for those minority who do have difficulties and who come to us for support, what we're increasingly finding is a range of different complex needs. And this is why we're making this point about this bill. So for instance, somebody may come to us with a housing issue, but at the root of that might be an issue to do with finance or accessing benefits or how they're dealing with compensation. And there could be other health problems related to that. So just narrowing the scope of this bill to very specific, discrete areas, health, housing and education, doesn't really reflect the reality and the complexity of the way people need support.
I suppose the one thing that stands in your favour in all of this, Matthew, is that the public does broadly support the armed forces in a way. I recall, shortly after the Iraq War first kicked off, people in uniform being abused, being spat at in the streets. We're a country mile away from that in terms of the public's regard for our armed forces nowadays.
Absolutely. And obviously, we as an organisation, we see the generosity of the public every year when we have the Poppy Appeal and throughout the year as well. And obviously, as we've seen over the last 18 months as well, the contribution of the armed forces during the pandemic in terms of the delivery of the testing and the vaccine rollout, but also the symbolism of someone like Captain Sir Tom Moore and what that can bring to the country as well. So absolutely, yeah, that's it. And I think that has changed as we've obviously been through a period of a number of significant conflicts over the last 2 decades.
We certainly have. Matthew Stewart from the Royal British Legion. Good to see you this morning. Thanks for being with us. Let's go and get the thoughts, from the forces themselves. Ben McBean is a former Royal Marine who was himself injured in an explosion in Helmand Province in Afghanistan back in 2008. Really pleased to say that Ben joins us on the programme. Ben, good to see you this morning.
Morning, how are you?
I'm very well, I suppose I should be asking the question of you. In as much or as little detail as you like, would you mind just telling us a little bit about your story and that which happened to you out in Helmand?
Yeah, I woke up one day in Afghanistan. I've been there for a couple of months and just had my own voice just told me that morning that something was going to happen, but you can't obviously do anything about it. So went out on a patrol. A couple of hours later, my right leg was blown off. My left arm was in a state. I'm now a double amputee. Career over. Almost my life was over, but I've just tried to, obviously since then, not bounce back, but just move forward, I suppose, and just try and make the best of the rest of my life. That's it.
And how much have you been able to do that? I mean, you're smiling with me this morning, but I'm looking at pictures presumably taken pretty soon after what happened in Helmand. You're smiling right now, but I mean, I suspect it's been a bit of a bumpy road to get to this point.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the cost of overcoming adversity, it cost a lot, you know, for me to smile, for me to walk to the shop. I've had to put a lot of work in. I've been injured 14 years now, which is a long time. And yeah, it's been hard work all the way, but my options, you know, I can just give up and just, you know, just sit there all day, or at some point I have to kind of move forward. I've got 2 kids now and I need to be there for them. And even before they were born, I need to be there for myself and just enjoy what's left of my life, or else it's kind of a waste of the lads, the doctors, the surgeons, the nurses saving my life. It would have been pointless if I just jumped out the window at the end of it. So yeah, it's hard work. I do have my down days and you do reflect and think, oh man, I wish I never got injured kind of thing. But it is what it is. And as I say, I'll just try and make the most of it.
Do you feel that, we were just obviously speaking to Matthew from the Royal British Legion there about the Armed Forces Bill. Do you feel that the military covenant in your case, that we've held up our end of the bargain, that the government has held up their end of the bargain, that we send you off to places like Helmand, knowing that you risk having injuries, the likes of which you experienced, but the quid pro quo is when you come back, we look after you? Do you feel like we have?
Yeah, I suppose to a degree, yeah. I mean, the thing is, it's a bit like, you know, I just think we did the best job that we could do with what we had at the time. And I think the government maybe could have done more, but when they realised they hadn't done more, I suppose they kicked in and sorted themselves out. As the years have gone on, things have adapted, things have changed. And I think that's the main thing. If something that needed to be there wasn't there, now it's probably there, or they're looking into it. If they were saying, no, just leave it, then that's the problem. But I think now most kind of issues, they're being looked at or resolved. So yeah, as I say, I mean, I posted a tweet the other day saying I'm not sure if the war was even worth it, but I think now looking back, you know, as a troop, as a soldier on the ground, our battles were just with, let's say if it was 10 of us Royal Marines versus 10 Taliban, that was our war. We didn't get to see the bigger picture and we wasn't really interested. It was just fight our own battles. And I think over the years with the wars, we've just done the best job we can do with what we've got. And I think the government are now listening to us for once, and they're doing the best job now that they can do, I believe.
It must still be bittersweet to see the end of British military involvement in Afghanistan, given the state of the country. I mean, I spent some time with 4-2 Commando out in Helmand, you know, a few years ago now. In that particular tour, they lost, you know, plenty of your colleagues. I mean, that must be bittersweet for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's the thing. It's like, you know, to gain a kilometre, a guy might die, or someone's lost their legs, or whatever, like myself. And obviously now, if we just leave, they're just going to take that kilometre back. So you think, oh, what was the point? But again, if you look at it like that, it's kind of disrespectful to the troops on the ground, because we fought hard to gain that kilometre and we did a good job, kind of thing. So I'm glad that we're kind of out or backing out now, because it saves more people being injured like myself or killed, and people's mental health 10 years down the line goes down the pan, families that have been devastated. Where do you draw the line? You know, I don't feel like we won the war kind of thing. But I just think we did a good job whilst we were there, and I'm just glad it's kind of over now, because it just saves any more drama, because my injuries last forever, mentally, physically, emotionally. And obviously if you're dead, your family's, their kind of emotions, it's a lifelong thing. So I think the line's been drawn, and I've got no complaints.
Ben, before we let you go, I mean, I know that, you know, bootnecks, commandos, that, you know, they're ingenious. They can turn their hand to anything. I am told, however, if England win the football on Sunday, you're going to be using your prosthetic leg in a way that it perhaps wasn't entirely designed for.
I'm not sure if I should have said that. I kind of had too many beers.
Please tell our viewers.
I said, I said I'd fill my prosthetic leg up with lager. I think I fit about 10 pints in there, and I was going to neck it. So I'll have to, if we win, I'll give it a good wash, and I'll fill it up, and I'll neck it, and I'll post it on my Twitter page. So yeah, we'll see. Fingers crossed. I'll have to do it to win.
Oh, dear Lord. I've done a few yards of ale in my time, but nothing like that. I wish you all the very...
I've done worse, so that should be fine.
Once a bootneck, always a bootneck. Ben, great to see you this morning. Thanks for taking the time to talk to us.
Cheers.
Latest figures show the number of complaints made to Ofcom has increased by around 800% over the last 5 years. Pretty significant. Here to tell us more, Ofcom's Chief Executive, Dame Melanie Dawes. Melanie, great to see you this morning. An 800% rise is reasonably significant. Is it that television has just become so egregious over the past 12 months, or that we've all been stuck indoors watching more of it than ever?
Well, I think we're a nation of TV lovers. And as you say, we've been watching more of it in the last year, particularly with lockdown. And, you know, for the most part, our broadcasters do a brilliant job and they get fantastic TV and so many different programmes catering to all sorts of different audiences and different tastes. But every now and then people see something they don't like and they can complain to Ofcom, and that's where we come in.
So on what basis does Ofcom make its rulings? You know, people like me have to spend hours and hours poring over the regulations to make sure that we're doing our jobs properly. But for the members of the public, what are the tests that you use?
Well, look, what we absolutely base our decisions on, and we don't step in lightly, by the way, because freedom of speech is incredibly important. But when we do step in, the sorts of things we're thinking about are what is the audience really interested in? What do they really care about? We do a lot of research. We talk to audiences. So when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, people really didn't like swearing on TV, for example, but now they're a bit more relaxed about it, provided that we take care around the watershed. So we really do make sure we understand where audiences are coming from.
Give us an idea of some of the most complained about pieces of television, and anything, of course, involving the BBC. Just go straight for it.
Well, so the kind of stuff that drives the numbers and those big increases that you were mentioning tends to be the shows, perhaps not surprisingly, where you've got a lot of people watching. So it's often the big, very popular entertainment shows. So over the decades, it's been things like I'm a Celebrity, Big Brother, Coronation Street even. So that's the kind of thing that drives the big numbers. In the past year, the things where we've taken action have been, for example, on things like COVID, where we've actually had really bad misinformation. People saying, for example, that 5G is causing COVID, and broadcasters putting that on without any kind of challenge or context. So that's the sort of stuff we're more likely to take action on, the more serious harm, because we do prize freedom of speech.
Can you, Melanie, can you put a figure on what percentage of complaints are actually upheld by Ofcom?
Yeah, so look, we had 140,000 complaints last year. That was 12,000 programmes. And we actually investigated 48. So it's not that many to start with. We don't step in lightly. And then about half of those, we actually found that there'd been a breach. So that's a rough idea of our numbers.
Where does Ofcom intercept? Because, of course, you know, it is one thing to be a broadcaster on terrestrial, a broadcaster through satellite, but people are broadcasting via phones, you know, via desktop PCs these days. What is Ofcom's role, if anything, in looking at that?
No, that's a really good point. And, you know, increasingly, of course, you've got a lot of stuff being broadcast on the internet, on social media platforms. But what we find is that actually viewers know that what they see on TV can be trusted, particularly when you're thinking about things like news. And that's why I think it's so important that we've got the rules and safeguards, because actually British viewers do tell us that they go to the TV when they want to know the facts, when they want the accuracy. Whereas, you know, they also know that you can't always trust what you see online. So I think actually our broadcasting rules are a really important part of the system.
And I have to ask you, as you're here, how's the search for a chairman going at Ofcom? I understand that Paul Dacre's not been best pleased with the outcome of his interview process.
Well, look, it's the government who are in charge of that. Quite rightly, they get to choose our chair. So it's still continuing, as you say.
Well, just one final question. Are people wanting to find out just a little bit more about what Ofcom is doing, you know, and the responsibilities on broadcasters like Sky News and others, where can they go?
You can go to our website. We always publish as much as we possibly can, including where we don't take action on a TV complaint. We always explain, you know, at least at the high level, why not. So go to our website and you can find out more about what we do.
Dame Melanie Dawes, Chief Executive of Ofcom. Good to see you this morning. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks very much.
Time to see how the weather is looking. Joe's standing by in the glass box.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Hello there, good morning to you. Well, the weather is, as they say, disappointing for the time of year, still really rather unsettled. That's not to say there isn't any sunshine nor any warmth, just that we're also seeing some showers and longer outbreaks of rain as well. So for today, the winners and the losers, northern and western parts are seeing more in the way of clouds, some showery outbreaks of rain there, particularly for southern parts of Ireland. Central, southern, eastern areas seeing a nice dry start to the day, some brightness as well. And as temperatures rise, which they will to a high of 24 or 25 degrees Celsius, that's 77 degrees Fahrenheit, we'll find showers breaking out. And where you get those showers, they could be heavy and slow moving, particularly over the East Midlands, parts of East Anglia too. Through the latter part of the day, those showers eventually start to die away to give some evening sunshine. But then we see cloud increasing down towards the southwest. And that's going to bring some heavy rain in overnight, which will just skirt its way through parts of South Wales, reaching central southern areas by morning and then pushing away towards parts of Kent. Meanwhile, central and northern parts seeing the best of the sunshine, but also more of the day's showers.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.